Her father left her a farm, not the house, not the money, not the business he built over 40 years, just the farm, the old one, the one nobody had touched in over a decade. And when she finally walked through that door, what she found inside brought her to tears. This is a real inheritance story. And I promise you, by the time this is over, you will not believe what was hidden inside that farm. You won't believe what her family did. And you absolutely will not believe what her father left behind. But to understand the full shocking truth of what happened, you need to understand who this woman is and what kind of man her father was. Because this story isn't just about a farm. It's about generational wealth that was almost stolen. About family secrets buried so deep they were almost lost forever. About a father's last gift hidden in a place nobody thought to look. Stay with me, because this one will break your heart before it puts it back together. If family betrayal and hidden inheritance stories hit different for you, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what this father hid on that old farm is one of the most unbelievable real stories I have ever told. And you are not going to want to miss what comes next. Her name was Clara. Clara Minsa. 41 years old, a schoolteacher, 2 kids, a small apartment in the city 3 hours from where she grew up. She had not been back to the farm in 11 years, not by choice or not entirely. Life had a way of stretching the distance between people and the places they came from. Work, children, a divorce that still hurt in the places she didn't talk about. And underneath all of it, a quiet grief she carried for a man she had loved completely and understood only partially. Her father, Joseph Mensa, had farmed that land for over 4 decades. He had inherited it from his own father, passed down through 3 generations of a family that had scratched everything they had from the soil of that property. It was not glamorous work. It was not the kind of generational wealth people talked about in magazines. But it was real, and it was theirs, and Joseph had tended it with the particular devotion of a man who understood that the land remembered everything. He was a quiet man. Not cold, warm, actually, in the way that people who don't waste words are warm. He showed love through action, through presence. He was the kind of father who drove 3 hours in the middle of the night, when Clara's first marriage fell apart, who sat at her kitchen table until 4 in the morning saying almost nothing and meaning everything. He died on a Thursday in March, 2 days after his 73rd birthday, of a heart attack that everyone said was sudden, and that Clara always privately suspected he had seen coming. The will was straightforward on its surface, or so it seemed. Clara's 2 brothers, older, both of them, both still living near the family land, received the house, the savings account, the livestock, the farming equipment worth more than most people realized. Between them, they divided a comfortable inheritance. Clara received the deed to the old farm, the original property, the one her father's father had first broken ground on. The one that had sat unused since a flood 8 years ago had damaged the outbuildings, and Joseph had moved the active farming operation to a newer parcel of land nearby. Her brothers were not subtle about their reaction. "It's basically worthless," Marcus said at the reading, not quietly enough. "The old place hasn't been worked in years. It would cost more to fix than it'll ever be worth." Her other brother, Daniel, said nothing. He just nodded the way people nod when they agree with something they've already been told. Clara drove home that evening with a deed to a piece of land she hadn't seen in over a decade, and the particular numbness that comes not from grief alone, but from grief mixed with confusion, because something about the whole thing didn't sit right with her. She couldn't name it, not yet, but she knew her father. She knew the kind of man he was, and Joseph Mensa did not do things without a reason. 3 weeks after the funeral, she found the letter. Not in a lawyer's office, not in a safe. In the inside pocket of her father's old work coat, the one her mother had washed and folded and left hanging in the hallway of the family home for 11 years after he'd last worn it. The one Clara had taken, quietly, at the end of the funeral reception because she couldn't bear for it to go to strangers. It was a single page, handwritten, dated 5 months before his death. It said, "Clara, go to the farm, go to the barn, look underneath." That was all. She almost dismissed it. She almost told herself it was nothing, an old note, a father's sentimental habit, something that meant less than she wanted it to mean. She was a practical woman, a school teacher. She dealt in facts and lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences, not mysterious notes in coat pockets. But she kept hearing his voice in her head as she read it, the particular quiet of it. The way he never wrote a word he didn't mean. She called Marcus first. "Have you been out to the old farm?" she asked, a pause slightly too long. "Why would I go out there? Just asking." "Dad left me a note saying to go look at something." Another pause. "What kind of note?" "A handwritten one." "In his coat, Clara." His voice had a particular tone, the one older brothers use when they've decided something and want to make it sound like reason. "Dad was not well in his last months." "You know that. He got confused sometimes. Whatever that note says, don't go reading too much into it." She thanked him and hung up. Then she noticed something she should have caught during the call. She had not told Marcus what the note said. She had not told him it was about the farm specifically. She had only said Dad left a note. She had not mentioned the farm at all. Marcus had. She drove out to the old property on a Saturday morning in April, when the light was long and gold, and the fields around it were just beginning to green. The farmhouse was still standing, weathered and tired, but structurally intact. The windows were clouded with years of dust. The front porch sagged on one side. Vines had found their way up the eastern wall and were making slow progress toward the roof. But the barn was something else. Someone had been there recently. She could see it immediately. The padlock on the barn door was new, shiny, incongruous against the aged wood of the door itself. The ground around the entrance showed recent disturbance, boot prints in the soft earth, the kind left by people who were trying not to leave footprints and had not entirely succeeded. Her heart was beating in a way she didn't like. She didn't have a key for the new padlock. But the barn had a second entrance, a smaller door on the northern side that she and her brothers used as children, a door that she was fairly certain Marcus had forgotten existed. It was half obscured by overgrown hedges now. She pushed through the hedges. The door was old but unlocked. She went inside. The barn smelled the way old barns smell, hay and earth and time. The light came in through gaps in the roof boards in long, dusty shafts. Old equipment lined the walls. A rusted harrow, coils of wire, wooden crates stacked along the far wall. She stood in the middle of the space and tried to understand what she was looking at. Her father's note had said, "Look underneath." Underneath what? She moved slowly through the barn. She checked under the workbench, behind the crates, under the old canvas tarp folded in the corner, and then she saw it. In the center of the barn floor, almost invisible under a layer of old straw that had been scattered deliberately, she now realized to conceal it, was a seam. A rectangle cut into the floorboards with the kind of precision that doesn't happen by accident. A trapdoor. She cleared the straw away with her boot. The trapdoor had a recessed iron ring handle, old and heavy. She pulled it open. Stone steps led down into darkness, and from the darkness came something completely unexpected. Cool, dry air. Not the damp, earthy cold of a root cellar. Climate-controlled air. The kind you get in a room with proper ventilation and temperature management. Somebody had built something down there. And from the smell of it, a faint, unmistakable trace of something sweet and complex. She already had the beginning of an idea of what it was. She went back to her car and got her phone torch. Then she went down the steps. The room below the barn was larger than she expected. 8 feet of ceiling clearance, concrete walls, a proper floor. Along the left wall, a ventilation system quietly humming. Along the right wall, shelving units floor to ceiling, constructed from timber her father had clearly milled himself. And on those shelves, hundreds of bottles, wine, not cheap wine, not a hobby collection. She was not a wine person. She would be the first to tell you that. But she had been a teacher long enough to know the difference between something cobbled together and something built with serious knowledge and serious intent. The bottles were organized, labeled, dated. The oldest she could find, squinting at the label in her phone light, was dated 31 years ago. Her father had been making wine on this farm for over 3 decades, in secret, from grapes she hadn't known he was growing. She sat down on the bottom step and stared at the room for a long time. And then she did something she hadn't done since the funeral. She cried, not from sadness, from something more complicated than that, something that was grief and wonder, and the particular pain of realizing how little you can know about someone you love completely. Her father had built this, year by year, bottle by bottle, in the silence of this barn, on weekend mornings she'd never thought to ask about, over 40 years of quiet dedication. He had never told a soul, or had he? She found the ledger on the third shelf from the bottom, a proper accounting ledger, handwritten, every page in her father's meticulous script. It documented every vintage, every yield, every bottle, and on the last 3 pages, correspondence, printed emails stapled together, from a wine merchant in the city, from a specialist auction house, from a buyer she didn't recognize. The most recent email was dated 7 months ago, 4 months before Joseph's death. It was from the auction house. It contained an assessment of the collection's total value. She read the number 3 times before it made sense. $1.4 million. The old farm that nobody wanted. The inheritance her brothers had dismissed as worthless. It was sitting on top of a wine collection valued at $1.4 million, and her brothers had been here. She had seen their footprints, which meant at least one of them, probably both, already knew. I have to stop right here, because what Clara's brothers did next is one of the most shocking family betrayal stories I have ever come across. Drop a comment right now. Did you see this coming? And make sure you are subscribed, because this inheritance story is about to get even more unbelievable. What they tried to do with that hidden will is jaw-dropping. The ledger told the full story. Joseph Mensah had started making wine 31 years ago, almost by accident. A neighbor had given him a cutting from a grape variety she was struggling to maintain. Joseph had planted it experimentally on a small hillside plot at the edge of the old farm property, half expecting it to die through the first winter. It didn't die. It thrived. The soil on that hillside, it turned out, was extraordinary. A combination of clay and limestone that wine people who devoted their lives to understanding such things, would later describe as almost uniquely suited to that particular variety. Joseph didn't know the technical language. He just knew that what he was making tasted like something special. He read everything he could find. He took a correspondence course. He drove to visit a winery 3 counties over every year for a decade, quietly absorbing knowledge. He built the cellar himself over 3 summers, 1 weekend at a time, with the same methodical patience he brought to everything. He told no one. Not Clara's mother, who had died 16 years ago and who Clara always imagined would have loved this secret most of all. Not his friends, not his sons. The ledger didn't explain why he kept it hidden, but Clara thought she understood. Her father was a man who had spent his life watching things get taken from people who couldn't defend them. He had grown up poor in a way that left marks, and he had learned, in the particular way that experience teaches, that the things you love most are safest when they are known only to you. He had been planning to tell Clara. She found the evidence of this in the back of the ledger, a draft letter, written in pencil, never sent. It was addressed to her. It explained the collection, its value, its location. It contained the name of the wine merchant he had been corresponding with and instructions for how to work with the auction house. It was dated 8 months ago, which meant he had written it before the footprints in the barn, before someone else had found the trapdoor, before whatever had happened in those final months of his life that she was only now beginning to piece together. She drove to the family home that afternoon and asked her mother's sister, her Aunt Patricia, who had lived with the family for 30 years and missed nothing, a single question. In the months before Dad died, did Marcus or Daniel ever go out to the old farm? Aunt Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, Marcus went out there 4 times that I saw. Twice with Daniel, once by himself, and once, she paused, with a man I didn't know. I asked your father about it. He told me not to worry, but he was worried. He was very worried, Aunt Patricia said quietly. The unknown man turned out to be a property developer. It took Clara 2 days, and a conversation with the county land records office to confirm it. A development company had filed a preliminary inquiry on the old farm property 14 months ago, while Joseph was still alive. The inquiry had been withdrawn 4 months later, around the time Joseph had written the draft letter in the back of the ledger. Around the time, Clara suspected that he had understood what his sons were attempting. The plan, as best she could reconstruct it, was this. Marcus and Daniel had discovered the wine cellar. She never found out exactly how. Whether they had been searching deliberately or had stumbled on it by chance. They had understood its value, and they had decided that the best way to get access to it was to ensure the old farm came to them in the will, not to Clara. They had spent months working on their father, suggesting that the old farm should be sold as a family asset, that it was irresponsible to leave it sitting idle. That Clara, living in the city with her own life, had no practical use for farmland. What they had not anticipated was that Joseph had understood exactly what they were doing. He had changed the will not away from Clara, but to protect her. The original draft had split the farm as a shared family asset. The final version gave it entirely to her. He had made the old farm look like the least valuable thing in his estate. He had made the house and the savings and the equipment look like the prize, and his sons had taken the bait completely. But there was one more thing in the cellar, one thing she almost missed. Behind the last rack of bottles, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with twine, was a flat rectangular package. She opened it carefully. Inside was a deed, not to the farm, she already had that, to the hillside plot, the small parcel of land where the grapes grew. The plot was registered separately from the main farm property, under a different survey designation. In a filing system so old and underdigitized that it had never shown up in any of the standard property searches. It was registered in her name. It had been registered in her name for 22 years, since she was 19 years old, since before Marcus had any idea the wine cellar existed. Before anyone knew there was anything to want, her father had been protecting this for her since she was a teenager. She stood in that cellar for a long time, in the quiet, in the cool, dry air her father had engineered so carefully, surrounded by 31 years of his patience and his love and his extraordinary, unspoken plan. And she understood fully for the first time what kind of man he had been. She made 2 decisions in that cellar. First, she was not going to say a word to her brothers, not yet. Not until she understood the full picture and had the right people in her corner. Second, she was going to fight for every single thing her father had built. She engaged an estate attorney, a woman named Sandra Osai, who specialized in contested inheritance cases, and who, within 48 hours of reviewing the documents, told Clara something that changed the shape of everything. The preliminary development inquiry that was filed on this property, Sandra said, spreading papers across her desk, was filed by your brother Marcus, not by the development company. He approached them, he initiated the process, And he did it while your father was alive and had not yet finalized the will. Is that illegal? That alone? No. But Sandra paused. We also found something in the property records. Someone filed an amendment to the land survey covering the hillside plot. It was filed 9 months ago. It attempted to fold the hillside parcel back into the main farm survey, which would have effectively erased the separate registration. My father's separate registration. The one with my name on it. Yes, the amendment was unsigned and was rejected by the county office. It didn't meet the filing requirements, but the attempt was made. Clara looked at her. Who filed it? Sandra said the name. It was Daniel. She confronted Marcus first. Not because she wanted a confrontation, she was not a confrontational person, but because she needed to see his face. She drove to his house on a Tuesday evening. She sat across his kitchen table and she told him calmly what she had found: the cellar, the wine, the ledger, the draft letter, the development inquiry filed in his name, the attempted survey amendment filed by his brother. She watched his face as she spoke. He went through several expressions: surprise, which was fake, then calculation, which was real, then something she could only describe as contempt. You have no idea what that land is worth, he said finally. Dad didn't either. He was sitting on a gold mine and letting it rot in a barn. We were trying to do something with it. You were trying to take it. We're family, Clara. Everything he had should be shared equally. Then why, she said, did you try to erase my name from the deed to that land 22 years after he put it there? Silence. Get a lawyer, she said, and left. The weeks that followed were the hardest she had navigated since her divorce. Marcus and Daniel challenged the will. Their argument was that Joseph had not been of sound mind in his final months, a claim that required them to produce medical evidence they did not have, because Joseph had been, by every account of every doctor who had seen him, entirely lucid until his final days. Their second argument was that the hillside deed was improperly registered, a claim that the county records office dismissed in a letter that Sandra described as unusually direct. There were phone calls that went unanswered, a family gathering she was not invited to, an email from a cousin she had always liked that said, gently and painfully, that she hoped Clara would consider the impact on the family before proceeding. That email hurt more than anything Marcus had said, because this was the thing about family betrayal that nobody warned you about. It was not just the people doing the betraying. It was the people who watched it happen and chose family loyalty over basic fairness. The quiet endorsements, the uncomfortable silences, the people who liked you but liked peace more. She spent a lot of nights in that period driving out to the old farm, sitting in the barn. Not going down to the cellar, just sitting in the old familiar dark of the space, smelling the hay and the earth, feeling closer to her father than she had felt anywhere else. She talked to him sometimes, out loud in the dark. She asked him if she was doing the right thing. She imagined he would say, "You already know." The legal challenge collapsed in 11 weeks. Without medical evidence to support the unsound mind claim, and with the county records office having already rejected the survey amendment, Marcus and Daniel's legal team had very little to work with. Sandra filed a countermotion documenting the attempted survey amendment as evidence of deliberate intent to defraud. The judge agreed to review it. Marcus settled out of court on a Thursday morning. He admitted no wrongdoing formally. That was part of the agreement. But he withdrew all challenges to the will and to Clara's ownership of the hillside parcel. Daniel had already withdrawn his challenge 2 weeks earlier. Clara stood outside the courthouse in the April sunshine and called Aunt Patricia. "It's over," she said, a long pause on the line. Then Aunt Patricia said, "Your father knew you'd win." "How do you know?" "Because he told me. 3 weeks before he died, he said, Clara will find it. And when she does, she'll know what to do." The wine collection was assessed by the auction house over 4 days the following month. The final valuation came in at $1.6 million, higher than the preliminary estimate. Because several of the older vintages had appreciated significantly in the intervening months, and because the collection, once properly assessed, was found to include 3 bottles of a variety that wine specialists described as exceptionally rare. Joseph Mensah, schooled in nothing but his own curiosity and a correspondence course, and a decade of quiet observation, had produced 3 bottles that collectors would bid for seriously. The auction was held 6 months after the legal challenge was settled. Clara attended in person. She stood at the back of the room in a navy dress and watched strangers bid on her father's life's work and felt something she had not expected. Pride, not for the money, for him. For the 31 years of Saturday mornings. For the care and the patience and the extraordinary privacy of it all. For a man who had loved something purely and quietly and completely, and had trusted his daughter to be the one who received it. She kept 112 bottles. The ones he had labeled with her name. There were more of them than she had expected, spread across nearly every vintage year, as if he had been setting aside 1 or 2 each time with her specifically in mind. She had them transported carefully to a storage facility. She has opened only one so far, a bottle from the year she was born, on what would have been his 74th birthday. She says it was the most extraordinary thing she has ever tasted. The farm is operational again. Clara hired a vineyard manager and expanded the hillside planting. She kept her teaching job. She drives out on weekends, sometimes with her children, sometimes alone. Her kids run through the barn the way she and her brothers ran through it 30 years ago, in the good years. Before the distance and the money and the complicated arithmetic of inheritance did what it does to families. She has not spoken to Marcus since the courthouse steps. She has spoken to Daniel once, a brief phone call, civil, unresolved. She says she doesn't know if that will ever change. She says she's made her peace with not knowing. Here is what Clara says about her father now. She says she used to think he was a simple man. Not unintelligent, she never thought that, but uncomplicated. A farmer, a quiet presence. Someone whose depth was measured in soil and seasons rather than in the hidden interior life that most people never showed anyone. She says she was completely wrong. Her father was not a simple man. He was a man who had chosen simplicity as a surface and kept everything that mattered underneath it, in ledgers and oilcloth, and the cool dark of a room below a barn. In the hillside plot, he had registered in her name when she was 19 years old without ever telling her why. He had seen the world clearly enough to know what needed protecting. And he had protected it, not with lawyers or confrontations or loud declarations of intent, but with patience and silence and a faith in his daughter that never wavered. He didn't just leave me an inheritance, she said. He left me a lesson about what it means to build something that lasts, about the kind of love that doesn't need an audience. The one thing she says she still thinks about, the one thread she cannot fully resolve, is this. She doesn't know how long Marcus knew about the cellar before their father died. She doesn't know whether Joseph ever confronted him directly, or whether he simply saw what was coming and moved quietly to protect what he could. She thinks about that sometimes. The silence between a father and a son who had betrayed him, what was said, what was left unsaid. She says some questions are not meant to be answered. Some things happened in private between people who are gone, and the only honest response is to sit with the not knowing and let it be. Joseph Mensah left his daughter a farm that nobody wanted. He left it to her because he knew, had always known, that she was the one who would understand it, that she was the one who would go down those steps, that she would stand in the cool dark of the thing he had spent his whole life building in secret, and she would not ask why he had never told her. She would just know. I need you to tell me, If your father left you something like this, would you have gone to look? Would you have taken it to court and fought for it the way Clara did? Drop your answer in the comments. This real story about generational wealth, family secrets, and a father's hidden gift has been shared thousands of times. And if it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more unbelievable true inheritance stories, because next week's story makes this one look simple. And trust me, you will not believe what that family hid.